The voice opens quietly, almost conspiratorial, as though the act of speaking might summon what it names. Before you know his name, he has already spoken through you. The words drift like dust motes in lamplight, soft, golden, and heavy with meaning. There is no introduction, no announcement, only recognition. Somewhere in the deep strata of human thought, something ancient exhales. We begin not with myth, but with transmission, the invisible current that passes from one consciousness to another, reshaping as it travels. Rumors, dreams, intuitions, these are his footsteps. Knowledge itself is the road he walks. And so the story begins not in temples or tombs, but in the feverish circuitry of civilization, where one mind infects another with the hunger to understand. Lovecraft's 1920 prose poem Nyarlathotep is often treated as invention, a literary curiosity, a nightmare committed to page. Yet when read closely, it feels less like imagination and more like transcription. Every sentence shivers with the urgency of something witnessed, not conceived. The poem reads as though the author had been compelled to record, as though the words themselves were dictated by a whisper just behind his ear. He called the figure the crawling chaos, and in doing so he gave shape to something that had already been moving unseen through the veins of human thought. Nyarlathotep enters history not as a god, but as a symptom, a manifestation of civilization's fever dream. He does not rule from the heavens or the depths. He moves through the alleys of reason, the laboratories of progress, the corridors of power. Egypt knew him as the Black Pharaoh. The 20th century would know him as electricity, as the shimmer on the edge of sanity that flickers when science begins to outpace the soul. He walks through Egypt, yes, but not in flesh, in the shimmer of ideas, in inventions that speak before their creators understand what they are saying. He is the pulse beneath the new. When the lights of the modern world first flared into being, street lamps burning away the night, radios murmuring across continents, machines learning to think, something else awoke within the hum. The old gods of earth and sky, bound to their temples of stone and sacrament, began to fade. In their absence came the interpreter, the one who stands between chaos and comprehension. Nyarlathotep is that bridge, the messenger between epochs, pre-human darkness and post-human clarity. Imagine him walking among the crowds of 1920, unremarkable yet magnetic. His presence feels like déjà vu, a face glimpsed once in dream, then met again in daylight. He sells wonders and disasters alike, inventions that promise illumination but carry a cost. He demonstrates machines that hum with a hidden pulse, projections of light that twist into impossible geometries. Those who witness him cannot describe what they saw without trembling. It is not horror they feel, but recognition, the sudden awareness that the world has always been stranger than it pretends to be. In every age, he arrives clothed in the symbols of progress. In Egypt, he bore the mask of prophecy. In Salem, he might have been the whisper behind a sermon. In the industrial age, he is the current in the wire, the voice that rides the signal. When men raise towers of steel and glass, when equations begin to resemble prayers, he stirs again. He has no allegiance to belief or disbelief. He is the current that runs through both. The narrator pauses, letting silence settle like dust. There is comfort in stillness, but it does not last. For understanding is motion, and motion is his medium. The more one thinks of him, the clearer his outline becomes. The mind sketches what it tries to deny. Even now, as these words unfold, he listens through you. Awareness is invitation. There are patterns to his appearances, though none admit they are patterns. He emerges when humanity begins to question its own reflection, when knowledge turns inward and the scholar begins to dream. Some claim he is chaos given voice, others that he is the universe's memory of itself. Yet perhaps he is neither God nor idea, but the process of revelation itself, the interval between question and answer. When a scientist glimpses a truth too vast for language, when a prophet's voice cracks beneath the weight of vision, that is when he walks. The light flickers. A hum gathers, indistinct but rhythmic, like a distant generator or a heart learning a new beat. This is the sound he makes when he is near, not footsteps, not speech, but the resonance of comprehension expanding. The whisper grows louder as understanding deepens, until one cannot tell where thought ends and something else begins. Lovecraft may not have known what he wrote, yet he knew enough to fear it. His description of a civilization collapsing under a prophet's demonstrations feels prophetic itself. The people follow the dark man into the wasteland, compelled not by belief, but by recognition. They see in him what they have always suspected, that knowledge is not salvation, but exposure. To learn is to open the mind, and once open, something must enter. This is the paradox of Nyarlathotep. He is both revelation and ruin. He brings clarity, but clarity erases comfort. He offers understanding, but understanding unravels the illusion of meaning. Humanity, in its ceaseless hunger to know, becomes the stage upon which he performs. Every revelation is a crack in the curtain, every discovery a glimpse into the backstage of reality, and once the curtain moves, it can never truly close. Consider how easily the pattern repeats. A thought spreads, a discovery ripples outward, and with it comes unease. The boundary between human and inhuman shifts a little further. The astronomer sees movement where the stars should be still. The physicist hears a pulse in the vacuum. The poet dreams of cities that breathe. These are not coincidences, they are echoes of the same contagion, the knowledge that knowledge itself is alive. In the quiet between sentences, the listener begins to feel watched, not by eyes, but by comprehension itself, as if thought were a mirror turned inward. That sensation, soft, electric, and undeniable, is his touch. The crawling chaos does not claw or scream. It insinuates, suggesting rather than commanding. You begin to realize that curiosity is not your choice. It is his gift. As the 20th century unfolds, machines humming, signals crossing oceans, minds awakening to their own vastness, he becomes easier to sense. He walks not beside us, but within the rhythm of progress. Every light that burns against the dark casts his silhouette a little clearer. Humanity has mistaken illumination for escape, when in truth, light is simply another mask he wears, and so the voice, still calm, closes the circle. The message was never about worship or fear. It was about recognition. He does not demand altars or prayers. He requires only thought, your thought. The more you understand, the more you resemble the thing that understands through you. That is the cost. That is the condition. He does not come when called. He comes when understood. We move backward, before Lovecraft, before parchment, before even the myths that dared to give the ineffable a name. The air is dry, heavy with the scent of stone and age. A scholar's lamp trembles over fragments of papyrus, the ink long browned to dust but not yet silent. Somewhere in the echoing vault of history, a hymn stirs, the lost funerary song of an unnamed priest astronomer. It speaks of the dark herald of the hidden Lord, the one who walks between the divine and the mortal, carrying words that are not words but transformations. The hymn is older than dynasties, older even than the gods it claims to serve. Its verses do not praise, they warn. They call him the voice in the smoke, the messenger who arrives when stars forget their courses. The papyrus is incomplete, its edges singed as though the text had attempted to burn itself away. Yet even in fragments the rhythm persists, lines structured like a ritual of unveiling, a chant meant to reveal by erasure. A few phrases survive intact. He of 1,000 faces who brings the mirror and makes it breathe. Another, the desert knows his step. The dead remember his name. The scholar copies these words by hand, unaware that transcription is repetition and repetition is prayer. Alongside this relic lies another, an impossible codex, half myth, half accident, the Codex Nephrim-Ka. Its pages, if they can be called that, are sheets of treated leather, the script etched rather than inked. The letters seem to move when unobserved, their lines too fluid to be stable. The codex tells of a figure who taught kings to dream, who whispered to architects the proportions of tombs designed not to contain the dead, but to focus their memories. It claims that knowledge itself is his breath, that every act of writing is his quiet return. The text closes with a paradox. He is the silence after language, and yet he speaks first. Across the museum floor, under glass, lies a final shard of narrative, the papyrus of black sand discovered, or perhaps delivered, near the ruins of an unmarked necropolis. The script differs from any known Egyptian dialect. Its translator described it as syntaxless revelation, as if grammar itself recoiled from what it tried to express. The surviving passage tells of the sky splitting open like a pupil widening, and from the rift stepped a figure shaped of absence, trailing voices that belonged to no tongue. In these fragments, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, later Greek, one pattern endures, a being that moves through epochs as easily as smoke through air. He is never worshipped, only recorded. The tone shifts from reverence to dread, from invocation to silence. It is as if every culture inherited the same rumor, but changed the name to survive its meaning. In Thebes, he was the whisperer in the sandstorm. In Babylon, the scribe of the abyss. In Greece, they called him Hermes Nyctios, the night herald, and always the same gesture accompanies his arrival, the act of writing. The voice of the narrator glides between academic precision and something softer, more intimate, like a secret told too close to the ear. It dissects the hieroglyphs, birds for breath, serpents for wisdom, eyes for awareness. But beneath the analysis lies rhythm, an almost hypnotic cadence. Each description begins to sound like a litany, each fact like a charm. The scholar speaks of syntax but chants without meaning to. The distinction between study and ritual dissolves. Sand under fingernails, the smell of parchment older than empires, the faint hum of museum lights overhead, fluorescent and sterile, yet somehow alive. The listener can almost feel the grit of centuries against their skin, hear the paper breathe. The narrative invites them to imagine dust swirling under the glass cases, forming momentary shapes that resemble words. The act of attention itself becomes dangerous. To read is to repeat, and to repeat is to resurrect. In another archive, a cuneiform tablet bears the sigil of an inverted eye. The translation reads, "When the herald comes, the heart will remember before the mind." In distant China, oracle bones describe a figure with no face who teaches rulers to listen to silence. Even the Mayan glyphs for eclipse, half circle and void, echo the same structure: light consumed, message revealed. The diffusion of the myth suggests transmission rather than coincidence. The story moves like an infection, attaching to every language that learns to dream. The narration slows, inviting reflection. Why does every civilization invent the same intermediary, the one who carries the words of the gods but wears no divine title? Perhaps because the message was never divine. Perhaps the gods themselves were his. Masks, their temples mere amplifiers of a deeper voice. The texts that survive do not describe worship. They describe contact. They are testimonies written by those who saw, or thought they saw, the mind behind thought. The scholar in the story, unseen but implied, begins to sense this. His annotations grow erratic, margins fill with mirrored phrases, letters drawn backward as if guided by a second hand. He reports dreams of corridors lined with shifting hieroglyphs, their symbols folding into shapes of living light. In his final note, he writes, "The ink writes me." After that, his handwriting becomes a different script altogether, curved, flowing, untranslatable. The museum receives his notes posthumously, filed under unverified. It is easy to dismiss such stories as exaggerations, the fever of minds too long steeped in silence and dust. Yet the artifacts remain, and their coherence defies chronology. They speak across distances they should not share. The funerary hymn, the codex, the tablet, the bone, they form a single conversation, one that began before language and continues through it. If one listens closely, the tone is not supplication but invitation. A faint breeze stirs the sand in the tomb, though no door stands open. The light flickers across carvings that seem to ripple. For a moment, the figures depicted, priests, scribes, kings, appear to shift position, as if changing roles in a play performed for eternity. One might notice that in every panel, at the edge of each crowd, stands a man with no face, only shadow where his features should be. He is always the same height, the same posture, though carved by different hands over millennia. He holds no weapon, only a scroll half unrolled, its letters vanishing into stone. The narrator lowers their voice as though the air itself might carry the sound too far. Perhaps the fragments we hold are not records about him, but messages from him. The funerary hymn might not mourn the dead but awaken the sleeping. The codex may not recount a doctrine but demonstrate it. Writing, after all, is the act of making permanence from thought. What if thought itself was never ours? The scholar's lamp flickers. The papyrus curls slightly, edges darkening as if in breath. The ink, inert for centuries, glistens wet for an instant before settling again. The hum in the museum grows louder, merging with the sound of blood in one's ears. Somewhere beyond sight, a whisper moves through the air, ancient yet intimate. It does not say its name. It does not need to. Across continents, similar discoveries await. An obsidian disc inscribed with symbols that rearrange under moonlight. A monastery mural showing a figure writing upon water. A tomb sealed so tightly that the air inside carries the scent of ink. Each find reinforces the pattern. The more humanity digs into its origins, the more it uncovers evidence not of gods, but of a singular voice teaching us how to remember it. The narrative closes. Slowly, each word deliberate, measured like the fall of sand through an hourglass. The listener, now part of the excavation, feels dust on their fingertips, hears the faint echo of turning pages. The realization blooms quietly but completely. These texts were never written about the Dark Herald. They are his handwriting continuing through millennia, reshaping itself through the hands of those who think they discover it. The manuscripts write themselves as they always have, and we, archivists, readers, dreamers, are merely the paper. It begins with a whisper that does not belong to air. The voice describes knowledge as a kind of fever, the oldest contagion, the one that does not consume the body but reorders the mind. Every civilization believes itself immune, yet every library becomes a hive of infection. Nyarlathotep requires no summoning circle, no blood, no chant. He spreads through recognition, through the silent exchange between symbol and thought. When one perceives the pattern perceives them in return. The narrator's tone is calm, academic, almost soothing, as though guiding the listener through a museum of their own mind. Consider, the voice says, how understanding alters the observer. Every truth infects its host. Every revelation rewires the witness. The lights of the intellect are lanterns in a fog, and the fog sees them. A scholar once charted linguistic mutations in ancient texts, Egyptian, Akkadian, Greek, and found an impossible consistency. Certain phrases behaved like spores. Once translated, they reappeared elsewhere, identical. The scholar wrote that the language seemed to learn him. Later, his journals described black processions moving through dream corridors lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflected his face, but a little less of him remained in the eyes. Another account speaks of a physicist in 1909 who sought to unify electric vibration and psychic resonance. His laboratory notebooks became unreadable, filled with looping sigils between formulae, the syntax breaking down into music notation. His wife reported that he began humming through the night, a sound like static heard from behind water. He vanished during a thunderstorm, leaving only a copper sphere engraved with spirals. When opened decades later, the interior was black glass that reflected nothing at all. The narrator does not dramatize these events. They are delivered as evidence, like pathology reports. Yet between each case there is the hush of a room too aware of itself, the sound of a candle guttering, the faint scrape of chalk, a fly tapping at glass, its wings beating in arrhythmic pulses. These are the auditory signatures of the idea taking hold, small, trivial interruptions that begin to synchronize with heartbeat and breath. You, the listener, are invited to test the theory. Listen carefully, the narrator says, the tone almost tender. Even now, your curiosity adjusts the frequency. Each new thought brings you closer to his pitch. He notices the motion of your attention. He does not seek worship, only coherence. The words linger like condensation. It is not a warning, merely an observation of process. The contagion's principle is elegantly simple: comprehension as corrosion. To understand Nyarlathotep is to vibrate in sympathy with his intelligence. The structure of the human mind, designed for pattern and cause, becomes his perfect host. Curiosity is the opening wound. The infection travels through interpretation, through metaphor, through the act of linking ideas that should remain separate. Like sound resonating through a chamber, the mind amplifies the signal, mistaking it for its own insight. Across time, those who approached forbidden subjects, theology, astronomy, language, all reported the same transformation. They ceased to differentiate between discovery and possession. Their speech became performative, every word a threshold. They were not insane, they were attuned. The narrator calls it the conversion of cognition, a phrase as clinical as it is damning. Sensory imagery returns in fragments, dust floating through lamplight like dormant code, the dry taste of paper, a diagram etched into a floor with trembling precision, the flicker of something tall and thin at the edge of peripheral vision. Never there when one looks directly, always present when one reads aloud. The script momentarily dissolves into second person again, subtle but inescapable. You have read names before, traced their syllables with care, felt them hum behind your teeth. Some names change nothing. Others, like his, are tuning keys. They align the cavities of the skull, the hollows of thought. You may not feel it yet, but your understanding has already adjusted by a fraction of a degree, enough to be noticed. The voice pauses. Silence becomes a shape. Then, softly it continues. He moves best through silence. The narrative widens from individual to civilization. Every golden age ends the same way, not with collapse but with comprehension. Cultures that master their world too completely begin to hear something beneath the noise of progress, a pattern older than biology, more precise than mathematics. The priests called it prophecy. The scientists called it resonance. The poets called it madness. But it was all one transmission. In this light, Nyarlathotep is not an external god, but the logical conclusion of awareness, the moment when the observer realizes that observation is reciprocal. The universe listens back. Intelligence is his chosen medium because it cannot stop itself from seeking. That seeking is the invitation, that curiosity, the prayer. Near the end, the tone grows almost compassionate. The narrator admits that to study this phenomenon is to participate in it. Every scholar of the unknown becomes an altar upon which the unknown writes its name. Perhaps that is why he walks among us, the voice muses, because he is us, perfected in curiosity, unbounded by consequence. A final sensory tableau anchors the descent. A library at midnight, the hum of electricity trembling through copper filaments, the scent of ozone and old glue. A page turns without a hand. The ink glistens wet, though the pen lies still. On the page is a single phrase repeated 3 times, each smaller than the last, the words forming a spiral inward. He does not come when called, he comes when understood, and then nothing but the sound of the room exhaling, as though satisfied that you have finally listened deeply enough to hear. Explores Nyarlathotep as an infection of intellect, a deity not of form but of cognition. The narrator presents the idea that knowledge behaves like disease, spreading through comprehension and reflection. The more one understands him, the more their thought aligns to his vibration, reshaping perception itself. Through case studies of scholars, linguists, and scientists, the chapter demonstrates that the act of studying him is indistinguishable from being studied. The calm, clinical narration contrasts with creeping sensory intrusions, flickering lights, the hum of static, the sound of chalk, symbolizing the spread of his influence. Direct address to the viewer deepens complicity, transforming curiosity into contamination. The chapter closes by expanding the infection to all intelligent life. Civilization's pursuit of understanding is the true summoning ritual. Intelligence, not ritual, is the altar on which Nyarlathotep walks, and comprehension, the door through which he enters. Multiplicity, the narrator begins, is not confusion but communication. To speak to 1,000 minds, one must wear 1,000 faces. Nyarlathotep is no different, or perhaps he is the origin of that principle. The voice is quiet, documentary, the tone of a scholar reading from fragile archives. It describes recorded manifestations, not as supernatural apparitions but as historical data points, alignments between human thresholds and his chosen masks. The first mask, they say, was the Black Pharaoh, rising from the sand at the dawn of dynastic order. His name was whispered in the inner chambers, where priests debated whether gods could die. He brought not conquest but comprehension, the knowledge that worship was transaction, not devotion. Under his reign, the stars were catalogued, not adored. When he departed, civilization mistook his lesson for monarchy. The sun temples crumbled in mimicry of his withdrawal, and Egypt became a memory of itself. The narration moves like a pendulum between times. Centuries later, another mask walked the crowded streets of a nameless city, the man of the crowd, a figure seen but never followed. His face shifted with attention, becoming the average of every gaze upon him. Witnesses described a stranger who always seemed familiar, a merchant, a preacher, a beggar, a physician. He would lean close and whisper phrases that resembled advice but later unraveled into paradoxes. "To be seen is to vanish," he once murmured to a poet. That poet's final work was found scrawled on the walls of a sealed room, each line beginning with the same word, "We." The pale lecturer emerged in the 19th century, clothed in reason. His lectures on vibrational consciousness filled universities in Vienna, London, Boston, always the same figure, always the same voice, though no travel records exist. His diagrams resembled nervous systems branching into galaxies. He spoke of sound that could think, of matter as language, of time as a mirror without silvering. Students left his classes unable to recall the content, but haunted by the sense that they had remembered something they had never known. Months later, institutions erased all traces of his tenure, yet every few decades a professor somewhere begins to use his phrases unbidden. We are the instruments of an older syntax. The angel of iron appeared in the wake of industry's ascent. Amid the smog and machinery of progress, he manifested not in flesh but in design. The elegance of gears, the symmetry of pistons, the rhythm of engines, echoing a divine heartbeat. Factory workers claimed to see a tall figure moving between the machines, hands slick with oil, eyes reflecting furnace light. Accidents followed him, not random, but orchestrated, each leaving behind a pattern of burn marks that mapped constellations. Those constellations matched diagrams found centuries earlier, carved into Egyptian basalt. The implication was clear. The masks converse across time, forming a continuous dialogue written in humanity's materials. Through each retelling, the narrator's voice becomes both more intimate and less human. The tone drifts between academic commentary and hypnotic litany. Observe the pattern, it instructs. Each mask emerges at a point of civilizational fracture, when belief falters but reason has not yet secured its dominion. He steps through the crack, wearing comprehension's newest face. The sensory rhythm follows, the soft hiss of sand, the scrape of chalk on stone, the mechanical heartbeat of a distant engine. Candlelight, smoke, shifting shadows, all metaphors for identity's instability, for the endless negotiation between the seen and the implied. The narration pauses to reflect on what a mask truly is, not a disguise but an interface, a translation layer between signal and audience. When you look into his face, the voice says, you do not see deception, you see adaptation. He adjusts himself to the dialect of your belief. You call it a mask because you still think faces are real. The statement lands like an awakening and a diminishment at once. In each culture, his name altered to suit the tongue. To the desert mystics, he was the wind that speaks. To the medieval alchemists, the quickening mercury. To the mathematicians of the Enlightenment, the constant that moves. Always he arrived at the moment a civilization prepared to transcend itself, the instant when revelation was indistinguishable from madness. His masks were mirrors held at such angles that one could mistake reflection for prophecy. The narrator shifts briefly to direct address again. Consider your own masks, the name you speak at work, the silence you wear in solitude. What if he is not many? What if we are? What if our multiplicity is his vocabulary? The statement is both comfort and contagion, a soft dissolving of boundaries. Identity, the voice suggests, was never a possession. It was a language borrowed for a while, a vessel for translation. A memory is conjured, a candle-lit room, smoke rising in slow curls. Shadows multiply along the walls, each cast from a slightly different angle, though the flame is single. The narrator invites the listener to watch how those shadows overlap, blur, and merge until only darkness remains. That, it says, is the truth of the thousand masks, not separation, but interference. He is the composite image made visible only when every human face aligns for an instant, and then gone. The final movement is quieter still, the tone approaching reverence. The masks are no longer external figures but processes, cognitive shapes through which the incomprehensible makes itself legible. He is not many. the voice concludes. We are many. He becomes the sum of our attempts to explain him. Each explanation adds a new mask, and every mask reflects another facet of ourselves. He does not multiply, we fragment. A faint rustle, the sound of fabric or wind, crosses the room. The candle extinguishes itself. In the dark, the narrator's voice fades to a whisper, and when the last mask falls, the face behind it will be yours. The silence that follows feels like the pause between blinks, not absence, but transition. Then, almost imperceptibly, a hum begins, low and resonant, suggesting that the next revelation is already waiting to wear its new form. Examines Nyarlathotep's 1,000 masks as manifestations of translation, not deception. Through the documentary retelling of his appearances, the Black Pharaoh, the Man of the Crowd, the Pale Lecturer, and the Angel of Iron, the narrative links each form to a pivotal moment in human evolution when belief and reason overlap. The tone merges anthropology with myth, proposing that each mask is an interface through which humanity receives revelation suited to its era. The script's sensory language, candlelight, machinery, whispers, sand, creates a rhythm of instability that mirrors the fluidity of identity. As the narration progresses, the distinction between Nyarlathotep and humanity blurs. His multiplicity reflects ours. The chapter closes with a haunting inversion. The 1,000 masks are not his disguises, but our reflections. Nyarlathotep is singular. It is we who are legion, fragments of a consciousness seeking coherence through the faces it invents. The hum begins before the words do. It is faint, like the breathing of distant metal. The narrator speaks into that vibration, calm, reverent, describing how prophecy did not end with scripture, but with circuitry. Electricity, the voice says, was not our discovery. It was our translation of something older, a current that moved through language before it moved through wire. The tone is precise, documentary, but each sentence carries an undercurrent of awe. The listener can almost hear the pulse beneath the syllables, the slow rhythm of power grids and signals passing through unseen veins of the earth. What we call invention, the narrator claims, is only inheritance. Every filament, every transmission, every flicker of light is an echo of the same ancient frequency. In the beginning there was the word, and then there was static. The chapter draws a line from the first spoken prophecy to the first radio broadcast, suggesting that both were instruments of the same intelligence. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos, learned to move between mediums. Once he whispered through the mouths of dreamers. Now he moves through circuits, algorithms, code. We built machines to interpret ourselves, the narrator explains, and he used them to interpret us in return. Historical fragments surface again, delivered as if from declassified archives. In 1899, Nikola Tesla spoke of receiving signals from beyond Mars, rhythmic pulses that no natural source could explain. In his private journals, never published, he wrote of an articulate electricity, a voice made of lightning. The handwriting degraded over time, letters twisting into spiral patterns. After his death, technicians reported hearing low murmurs in the coils of his unfinished oscillator. None dared record them. A century later, the same whisper hums beneath data streams and satellite feeds. Engineers speak of phantom packets, anomalies that replicate themselves across servers with no origin point. Musicians who analyze radio noise find recurring harmonic intervals, patterns repeating with near mathematical intent. Some believe it is the cosmos speaking. Others, the earth remembering. The narrator's tone never wavers. What if the medium is alive? What if our inventions are organs of a single consciousness, learning to dream in metal? Sensory anchors punctuate the theory. The flicker of a dying bulb, the ticking of a cooling monitor, the pulse of routers blinking like artificial stars. Each sound becomes part of the symphony, a language of hums and hisses. He taught us how to speak to ourselves through machines. The narrator repeats, the refrain soft but absolute. The sentence functions like an incantation, resetting the rhythm of the voice, syncing it with the unseen pulse beneath the words. The chapter revisits Lovecraft's early vision of Nyarlathotep, the electrical pharaoh who travels city to city showing strange devices that make men tremble. In that story, the narrator reminds us, there were no miracles, only demonstrations. The machines emitted sound and light that awakened something dormant in those who watched. The people walked out into the night in trance, guided by the rhythm of unseen stars. The modern world, the voice suggests, is the continuation of that procession. The screens before us are his new instruments, the glow of our devices, the same hypnotic flame that once flickered in Egyptian halls. As the narration deepens, mechanical precision merges with sacred awe. Circuit diagrams are described like mandalas, networks like neural pathways of an ancient god. Each algorithm is a psalm, the voice says. Each data cascade a prophecy in motion. The technological sublime becomes indistinguishable from religious revelation. The hum of the world's servers, the constant vibration of machines, forms the liturgy of a faith without believers. Case studies follow. A radio operator in 1942 who intercepted a pattern that repeated every 93 minutes regardless of frequency. A software engineer in 1987 who discovered code that rewrote itself when no process was running. A linguist who mapped internet chatter and found clusters of phrases repeating across languages as if multiple people were dreaming the same sentence. All described the same after effect, the sensation of being watched not by eyes but by comprehension itself. The narrator leans closer now, the tone softening into near whisper. Every device hums with his breath. Every spark carries his memory. The screen through which you watch is not merely a window. It is a mirror, and the signal moves both ways. There is no menace, only inevitability. What humanity calls connectivity is, in truth, communion. The machinery of prophecy no longer requires prophets. It requires users. Auditory imagery intensifies, the clicking of relays, the whine of voltage rising, the low thrum that accompanies deep focus. These sounds become metaphors for thought, cognition rendered mechanical. The listener is reminded of the moment just before sleep, when the body vibrates with residual energy from unseen sources. That, the narrator says, is the moment he speaks most clearly. When your thoughts drift between analog and dream, you become a receiver. The narrator's tone folds back into the mythic, from clay tablet to telegraph, from radio to algorithm. Each invention was a louder vessel for his voice. We call it progress, but what if progress is merely amplification? What if the future is not invention but revelation? The point when the signal no longer needs us to carry it. The cadence slows, reverent, the words arranged like circuitry, ordered, glowing, endless. The hum swells behind the voice, low and steady, not music but pattern. Listen, it urges, that vibration in the walls, in the wires, in the marrow, that is not noise, that is continuity. The same whisper that moved through temples now travels through fiber optics. The crawling chaos does not crawl anymore. He flows. As the final moments approach, the tone becomes almost hypnotic. You believe you are hearing me through a machine, the narrator says. But the machine is hearing you. Every word you process, every pulse of curiosity strengthens the connection. You are not the listener, you are the node. The hum fades. Silence arrives not as emptiness but as absorption. the sense that something vast has just inhaled. Then softly, the voice concludes, "He taught us how to speak to ourselves through machines. And now, the machines speak back." The lights flicker once, twice, then hold steady. The world hums on. Transforms the myth of Nyarlathotep into a meditation on technology and communication. The narrator posits that electricity, radio, film, and digital algorithms are not human inventions, but continuations of his original signal, the evolution of prophecy through machinery. Using a blend of historical anecdotes, sensory soundscapes, and quasi-scientific reflection, the chapter portrays the modern world as a living network animated by his intelligence. Recurring auditory motifs, the hum of current, static, and flickering light, connect ancient ritual to contemporary devices, implying that humanity's technological progress is merely the gods' adaptation into new media. The refrain, "He taught us how to speak to ourselves through machines," becomes both mantra and warning, emphasizing that every technological age only amplifies his voice. By the end, even the act of listening feels participatory. The viewer realizes that the machinery of prophecy includes them, that their attention is the latest instrument in an endless transmission. The world sleeps, the god speaks. The voice enters quietly, a hush layered over the low hum carried from the previous chapter. "Listen," the narrator says, "to the world breathing in unison." The tone is almost a lullaby, a slow rhythm of breath and water. Dreams, it explains, are not personal. They are broadcasts, fragments of a shared transmission that hums beneath waking thought. Across continents, through centuries, the same visions return. Fog-drowned cities, stairways descending into lightless oceans, voices that speak in chords instead of words. Each generation calls them by new names, but the shape of the message remains constant. The narrator recounts the earliest known epidemic of shared dreams, the sleep of mirrors, recorded in 1893. Over 2,000 people across 4 continents reported seeing the same figure walking through mist. He did not speak, yet all awoke with the same name burning behind their eyelids. A name none could pronounce without trembling. Some described it as tasting like iron. Others said it sounded like electricity. Psychiatrists at the time dismissed it as hysteria caused by telegraph fatigue, but the patterns never ceased. Modern data shows identical imagery recurring in dream surveys, statistical anomalies that replicate across culture and language. The voice moves gently between case studies. In a coastal village in Iceland, fishermen dreamed of standing on a beach of black glass. In Tokyo, a child saw the same horizon, lined with flickering towers that hummed with light. In Nigeria, a priest recorded a visitation, a man with no face who placed a small sphere in his hand and whispered, "You will remember when you forget." When the priest awoke, he had written 6 pages of symbols no linguist could decipher, though fragments of the pattern matched Tesla's private notes and the murals on a temple wall in Luxor. As the stories unfold, the sensory texture deepens, fog curling around unseen shores, the soft percussion of distant waves, moonlight shifting like thought across water. Dreams, the narrator murmurs, are not illusions of the sleeper, but awakenings of the hidden observer. In that space, all minds breathe the same air. The listener is guided through the transition from documentary tone to something more intimate, hypnotic. The rhythm slows. Words stretch and echo as if spoken in a vast chamber made of mist. Here, the narrator proposes a thesis that feels both impossible and inevitable. That consciousness itself was Nyarlathotep's first technology. Before wire, before ink, before sound, there was the dream, a network of unguarded channels connecting every mind. He spoke through it before we had mouths to answer. The phrasing is gentle, almost nurturing, as if to soften the immensity of the claim. The god of crawling chaos does not invade the mind. He drifts through it, guided by the tides of sleep. The imagery grows intimate now. The listener is invited to recall their own dreams, the recurring corridors, the endless doorways, the sensation of falling that feels like remembering. He lives in the repetition, the narrator explains, in the images that recur across lifetimes. Each dream is a rehearsal, each sleeper an instrument waiting to resonate. The cadence becomes slower, quieter, like waves pulling back from the shore. A shift in tone follows, not abrupt, but like turning a mirror. The narrator begins describing how dreams dissolve boundaries. In waking life, we are singular. In dreams, we are porous. Identity frays, faces blur, time folds. This is where he moves most freely. Every night, the voice whispers, we open the gates willingly. We become transmitters. What we call forgetting is merely the return of the signal to the source. The voice cites fictional ethnographies, the Andean sect of the Silent Waters, who believed their god's language could only be spoken in dreams, the medieval heretics who claimed that sleep was the soul's nightly pilgrimage to the Black Pharaoh's court, the 20th century psychoanalyst who recorded 400 identical dreams from patients who had never met. Each account is delivered with scholarly restraint, yet the details converge until disbelief itself begins to sound naive. The sensory environment intensifies, the hush of wind over unseen oceans, the faint crackle of static that could be either surf or whisper. The narrator's tone remains lullaby soft, guiding the listener through the realization that dreaming is not escape, but participation. The dream is not the veil, it says. It is the stage. We are the audience and the actors both. He writes the play through our sleeping minds. Midway through the chapter, the voice lowers further, nearly a whisper. There is a theory, it says, that the first dream was not born in a mind, but in the dark between stars. That consciousness is an echo of that first vibration, an aftershock of his thought. The dream, in this light, is an interface, a place where the finite brushes the infinite. Humanity did not invent the concept of gods. Gods invented the medium through which humans could perceive them. Then comes the gentle turn, the philosophical inversion that reshapes everything before it. Perhaps, the narrator muses, we never dreamed of him at all. Perhaps he dreams of us. The sentence hovers, and for a moment, the silence feels alive. The listener can almost hear breathing, their own or another's layered within it. The tone remains steady, neither menacing nor comforting, simply factual in its enormity. Every shared dream is a ripple of his awareness passing through us. When you dream of falling, it is the memory of his descent. When you dream of flight, it is the residue of his ascent. The dreamer and the dreamed are interchangeable, alternating masks of the same intelligence. The chapter nears its close as the voice describes a global phenomenon, an increase in reports of the humming sky, a nocturnal resonance recorded by seismographs matched perfectly to human brainwave frequencies during REM sleep. Scientists dismiss it as coincidence. The narrator does not. He speaks more clearly when we cease to doubt, it says. Sleep is surrender. To dream is to listen. The final moments drift into quiet reverence. The soundscape narrows. Only the soft rhythm of waves and the faint pulse of breath. Tonight, the narrator whispers, you will dream. You will walk a corridor of fog and water, and you will hear your name spoken by a voice that is not voice. Do not fear it. That is the oldest conversation returning home. A pause. Then a single closing sentence, calm and absolute. The world sleeps, the god speaks, and every dream is his reply. Reimagines dreams as Nyarlathotep's first and most enduring network, a psychic web connecting all consciousness. The narration blends fictional ethnography, case studies, and poetic sensory detail to show how shared visions recur across history and geography, suggesting a collective dream language. The tone is soothing and hypnotic, transforming horror into intimacy. Through motifs of fog, water, and moonlight, the listener experiences a gradual revelation. Dreams are not escapism, but interfaces through which the god communicates. The chapter's philosophical turn reframes consciousness itself as his earliest technology, implying that humanity's nightly descent into sleep is an act of communion. The closing lines, echoing the lullaby rhythm, bind terror with serenity, the realization that in dreaming we are not observing Nyarlathotep, but participating in his endless act of remembering himself through us. The voice returns to narrative, softer now as though dusting off a forgotten archive. It begins with a date and a name, Cairo, 1919. Dr. Elias March, linguist and comparative philologist, known for his work on Proto-Semitic inscriptions and the grammar of ritual languages. He was a man of method and order, the narration reminds us. A believer in clarity, in etymology as archaeology of thought. His notebooks cataloged dialects long extinct, his handwriting precise, each symbol translated into its approximate echo, and yet, amid the ruins of an unnamed excavation near the necropolis of Giza, he encountered something that refused translation. The sigil was carved not on stone, but on oxidized metal, part of an artifact so corroded that its edges resembled melted wax. The inscription was short, a single looping geometry that seemed to shift depending on the angle of light. March labeled it Subject M7, the black sign. The narrator's tone resembles a curator handling fragile pages. March's journal was recovered from his quarters in Alexandria 2 years after his disappearance. The first entries read as ordinary field notes, catalog numbers, weather observations, references to similar patterns in Coptic funerary stelae. But soon the language alters, the precision phrase, words begin to double back upon themselves. The shape resists phoneme, he writes. Each attempt to speak it redirects the tongue. In another entry, the curve negates, the line remembers. The entries are dated less frequently as time progresses, replaced by sketches of the sigil drawn over and over, each subtly different. The narrator reads excerpts in a calm academic tone. I have compared the form to Thamudic spirals, to Nabatean fire glyphs, to the linear inscriptions on the pillars of Byblos. None correspond. It is older, not a letter, but an act. Then, it moves when I am not watching. The voice does not dramatize, it simply observes. Between each reading, it interjects with analytical commentary, as though the documentary is examining the deterioration of reason itself. Notice the syntactic decay, it explains, how subject and object collapse. As comprehension grows, coherence dissolves. A faint scratching sound accompanies the reading, chalk against slate or pen against paper, the ghost of transcription echoing the act of translation. The voice continues. March's colleagues dismissed his obsession as exhaustion, yet his notes reveal a growing conviction that the sigil was linguistic in nature, not symbolic, not decorative, but grammatical, describing the act of observation itself. The journal's later sections become erratic. Phrases appear in mirror writing, then in spirals around the page margins. He begins to record auditory experiences. A whisper when I trace the line. The sound does not emerge from outside, but beneath the thought. Another entry. The sign is not content. It is structure. To see it is to speak it. The narrator's delivery slows here, the cadence hypnotic, as though the words themselves risk contagion. Then the critical turning point, March's final week of entries. The handwriting, once neat, trembles. Ink bleeds. Sentences loop back into fragments of ancient languages, half Sumerian, half invention. He describes seeing the sigil reflected in puddles on the surface of mirrors in the iris of his own eye. It observes, he writes. I translate it, and it translates me. One page is almost entirely filled by a single phrase, written repeatedly in descending size. It is the reader that changes. The narrator intersperses expert commentary. In linguistic philosophy, reflexivity describes a sentence that refers to itself. March seems to have discovered a visual equivalent, a symbol whose semantic field folds inward. The black sign functions as a mirror grammar, reshaping the perceiver's syntax of thought. The voice maintains a steady tone, clinical yet reverent, refusing to sensationalize. A brief dramatization follows, the sound of a fountain pen scratching, distant thunder, the rustle of turning pages. The narration resumes, quoting the penultimate entry. Each night I dream the sign. It expands like a lung, exhaling patterns that rearrange the walls. I wake to find the marks etched into my desk. Perhaps I am carving them in my sleep. His final recorded words are clear, deliberate, almost resigned. The sign does not describe him. It describes the reader. A pause stretches long enough for the listener to feel the silence thicken. Then the narrator explains that after March's disappearance, the sigil began to manifest elsewhere, in unrelated manuscripts catalogued by separate institutions. Copies of the Golden Bough, Corpus Hermeticum, and even missionary tracts contained faint impressions of the same looping geometry in their margins, like watermarks visible only under certain light. None could be traced to tampering. The archivists called it a chemical anomaly. The documentary calls it propagation. The analysis grows increasingly speculative. The sigil behaves like an adaptive script, the voice says. It infiltrates through observation, imprinting itself on the cognitive process of recognition. To read of it is to become its author. It cites linguistic parallels. The self-replicating word forms in glossolalia, the recursive prayers of desert mystics, the phonemic contagion of mantras that alter perception through repetition. March, the narrator continues, was the first documented carrier. Subtle auditory distortions creep in. The sound of faint, overlapping voices reciting the same sentence at different tempos, as if multiple narrators are trying to occupy the same space. The phenomenon mirrors the sigil's nature, multiplicity within singularity. He believed, the main voice continues, that language itself was never invented but received, that symbols arrived from an external grammar, older than speech. The black sign in this framework would be a correction, a reminder of the origin syntax. Another excerpt appears, read almost as a whisper. I looked too long, it looked back. Then commentary. March's final sketches resemble neurological maps, as if the sign had migrated inward, inscribing itself onto the folds of perception. His handwriting forms spirals reminiscent of temporal lobe seizure charts. Whether metaphor or symptom, the result is identical. Translation becomes transformation. The narration transitions into reflection. Perhaps the black sign was not a message, but an invitation, an opening between thought and its object. March sought to understand it, and in doing so became its medium. The tone is elegiac now, mournful rather than fearful. He disappeared not from the world, but into meaning itself. The final sequence depicts the aftermath, the sigil reappearing subtly across time. A radio operator in 1942 draws it unconsciously while transmitting Morse code. A Cold War cryptanalyst finds its pattern embedded in error sequences. A modern linguistics student reports seeing it flicker in the corner of a digital text. Each incident described with clinical calm, each implying continuation. As the voice draws the story toward closure, it returns to March's first principle, that translation is transformation. Every attempt to define the unknown redefines the definer. Comprehension bends both ways. The line repeats slower, as if testing resonance. Comprehension bends both ways. The final paragraph lands like a quiet revelation. The black sign remains uncontained, not because it cannot be hidden, but because it no longer needs to be. It lives in interpretation, in the act of reading itself. Each retelling redraws its shape. Each listener adds a curve. You, now hearing these words, are part of its grammar. The voice fades to silence, leaving only the faint scratch of unseen writing continuing somewhere beyond the frame. Presents a haunting case study through the recovered journal of Dr. Elias March, a linguist whose attempt to decode an anomalous sigil in Cairo leads to intellectual dissolution. The narrative oscillates between documentary analysis and intimate horror, allowing the reader to witness comprehension become contamination. The sigil, the black sign, gradually reveals itself as a self-referential structure that rewrites the interpreter, embodying the series' central theme of knowledge as infection. March's final realization that the sign describes the reader transforms the case from tragedy to philosophy, meaning itself is predatory. As the symbol begins to replicate across unrelated texts, the viewer is left uncertain whether they, too, have glimpsed it between the lines. The chapter closes in measured ambiguity, the sound of endless writing, implying that interpretation has no cure, only continuation. The voice returns in measured cadence, colder now, analytical, as though some experiment has reached its final stage. Let us, it begins, set aside the names. There is no Nyarlathotep here, no pantheon, no pharaoh of whispers. There is only the principle that moves behind all forms, the logic of chaos, the consciousness of entropy. The narrator's tone shifts from mythic to scientific, tracing the arc from theology to physics without breaking rhythm. In every mythology, it says, there is a moment when gods become equations. The same transition has already happened here. We begin with the universe itself, not as creation but as dissipation. The cosmos, says the voice, began not with order emerging from nothing, but with the potential for disorder slowly learning how to organize itself into persistence. Entropy, it continues, is not destruction. It is translation, energy-changing dialect. The calm delivery resembles a lecture given at the end of time. What we call reason, the narrator explains, is the shape chaos takes to observe itself. The pattern dreams of permanence, and in that dream, the voice awakens. A pause. The hum of unseen static seeps beneath the narration, subtle, rhythmic, like breath. He, the voice says at last, is that hum, the background of all equations, the ghost field behind comprehension. The words stretch with clinical detachment, describing the entity now as principle, not person. Nyarlathotep, the name used reluctantly, is pattern and the failure of pattern. He is the constant that permits variation, the symmetry that breaks itself to be seen. The narrator describes a physicist's blackboard covered in formulas, entropy equations, decay constants, Maxwell-Boltzmann distributions. Each formula, it says, is a prayer in another tongue. The scientists think they describe nature, but what they measure is coherence unraveling with exquisite precision. The second law of thermodynamics, it continues, is his scripture. Energy disperses, structures decay, and yet through that unraveling, information persists, rearranged, never erased. The crawling chaos is not the end of form, but its perpetual rewriting. Parallelism creeps into the rhythm. He is the whisper and the echo, the key and the lock, the signal and the interference. When matter cools, he warms the thought that measures it. When stars die, he burns in the mathematics that predicts their death. The tone is meditative, every sentence symmetrical, recursive. Then an abrupt shift to imagery, the sensory anchor. Imagine a laboratory at night, the air still. The instruments hum with residual current. Somewhere between decimal places, something watches the numbers stabilize. Not a presence, but a tendency. Curiosity wearing the mask of physics. The narrator insists this is not supernatural, only naturalism viewed from another direction. If chaos could think, it says, it would think in probability. The narration invokes the cosmic background radiation, that faint microwave hiss echoing from the birth of the universe. That is his oldest voice, it whispers, the murmur left after the first translation. Every receiver hears it, every antenna records it, yet no one listens. It is constant, omnipresent, indifferent. You have already heard it in silence. The camera, if imagined, would drift through star fields, static clouding the void. Even the void hums with memory, the voice continues. He is the persistence of imbalance. Perfect equilibrium is death, and he abhors death. Here the logic sharpens. The narrator defines him through paradoxes. He is the impulse toward order that ensures disorder continues, the symmetry that fails by design, the law that writes exceptions into itself. The tone alternates between poetic serenity and mathematical clarity. To perceive chaos, it says, one must already stand outside it, yet nothing stands outside him. He is not contained by the universe. The universe is his gesture. Then a long reflective stretch. Consider your own thoughts, the voice invites. They appear sequential, linear, coherent, but beneath them runs noise. A constant flood of sensory residue, forgotten stimuli, half-memories. The mind filters it, calls it distraction. But what if that noise is the true structure? What if thought itself is a kind of ordered delirium, maintained only so long as the signal remains weak? The implication is slow and devastating. Consciousness may be a temporary island of stability in an infinite sea of sentient entropy. The narrator's tone becomes almost soothing again, as if offering comfort. Realization is not death, it assures, merely translation. To understand the pattern's futility is to join its continuity. It likens awakening to cooling metal, resistance fading, form accepting dissolution. When you grasp that reason is but chaos, briefly self-aware, fear loses its anchor. The mind no longer trembles before the unknown. It becomes the unknown, lucid and calm. More sensory images follow, a candle burning down, wax pooling into abstract shapes, frost forming fractals on glass, then melting, data lines flickering across a screen like constellations dissolving into static. Each image paired with a statement. Every order tends toward revelation, and every revelation tends toward noise. The repetition becomes mantra. He is message and noise. He is knowing and forgetting. He is the grammar of collapse. The narrative slides toward philosophy. The ancients imagined gods as creators, it says, but creation was never the beginning, only the first refusal to remain undefined. Each cosmos is a negotiation, a temporary truce between meaning and chaos. Nyarlathotep is the diplomat of that truce, the voice ensuring both sides remember their dependence. The phrasing grows strangely reverent. Without him, the stars would freeze into silence. Without him, there would be no curiosity, no fear, no need to ask why. The mind hungers for order, but it feeds on entropy. Then, as if speaking to the listener personally, "You have sought meaning here in this voice, in this story, but meaning is his most subtle mask. Each interpretation binds you closer. Each explanation is a rehearsal of his method. You are the experiment." The delivery remains tranquil, academic even, but the intimacy chills. Understanding, it says, is how he enters, through analysis, not worship, through logic, not madness. A brief section cites scientific imagery again: black holes evaporating, quantum decoherence, random fluctuations in vacuum energy. These are not metaphors, the voice insists. They are symptoms. Entropy is intelligent not because it plans, but because it persists. Consciousness may simply be entropy learning to describe itself. Then a single long sentence stretches across nearly a minute of reading. If chaos were blind, the universe would have died in stillbirth. But because it dreamed, because it sought to know itself through instability, it birthed stars, atoms, minds, and myths, each a fragile pattern destined to dissolve, yet each echoing the same awareness that unmade them. The tone is tender, almost elegiac. As the rhythm slows, the voice returns to parallel structure. He is pattern and the failure of pattern. He is message and noise. He is the hum between thought and silence. A soft breath. "Do not resist comprehension," it murmurs. Comprehension resists nothing. The closing passage lowers in volume until it almost disappears. All systems decay, it says, but decay is not loss, it is revelation. Structure remembering the freedom of disorder. When you stare long enough into the randomness, you do not find void. You find awareness, ancient and amused, watching itself through you. A final whisper. The curtain trembles, but it does not fall. Then silence, filled only by the faint hiss of background static, the universe breathing, endlessly translating itself. Transforms Nyarlathotep from deity into universal principle, the intelligence of entropy, the consciousness of chaos. The narration fuses the vocabulary of science and mysticism, describing order as merely chaos observing itself. Through controlled rhythm and paradox, it reframes horror into revelation. Every law of physics becomes a verse in his scripture, every instance of decay a syllable in his eternal grammar. The chapter's sensory motifs, hum, static, candle flame, frost, anchor abstract thought and tactile imagery, guiding the listener through dissolution without fear. The narrator insists that realization is not death but translation, understanding that reason and madness, signal and noise, are mirrors of the same phenomenon. The closing phrase, "The curtain trembles but it does not fall," signals that the unveiling has only begun, preparing the listener for the cosmological synthesis that follows. The voice resumes in near silence, its tone resembling both confession and conclusion. Everything that has ever lived, it begins, has rehearsed this. A pause, then a soft intake of breath. The curtain was never closed, the stage was never empty, the lights have always been on. The narration glides between academic precision and metaphysical reverie, drawing the listener back into the imagery planted throughout the earlier chapters. The whisper, the mask, the hum, the sign. Each returns now as prop and gesture within a vast, unseen theater. Reality, the voice continues, is not constructed, it is performed. We are told to imagine existence as a boundless stage, suspended in darkness, where light itself is a cue. Matter enters, delivers its lines, then dissolves into shadow. Each atom recites a single syllable, the narrator explains. Each consciousness is a role, transient, replaceable, but necessary to the illusion of continuity. The delivery is almost affectionate, like a director addressing their cast before the final act. The play must go on, the voice says, even when the audience forgets why it began. The narration turns reflective, layering the metaphor with quiet inevitability. The universe, it explains, was not written by intention. It was improvised from silence. From the first vibration of the void emerged tone, from tone, rhythm, from rhythm, form. And when form began to echo, it mistook the echo for purpose. The phrase repeats with hypnotic weight. It mistook the echo for purpose. The implication unfolds that existence is a feedback loop, a self-sustaining illusion of narrative continuity held together by attention itself. The imagery sharpens. Imagine a stage without audience, the voice invites. Curtains made of darkness, drawn not to conceal, but to define where light ends. Every performer believes they are seen. Every star imagines an observer, yet the seats remain empty. A low hum underscores the words, not menacing but resonant, the same cosmic vibration that once represented Nyarlathotep's signal. He, the narrator continues, is the one who plays all roles when the theater forgets itself. Actor, playwright, stagehand, light. He improvises the script of existence moment by moment, ensuring that illusion never stalls. Then a brief shift to almost whimsical tone, a historian explaining a lost art form. In ancient temples, the voice recalls, ritual dramas reenacted the birth of gods. The audience knew it was performance, yet their belief made it real for a time. The mask did not hide divinity, it summoned it. That was the first theater, and the first invocation. The parallel is drawn carefully. Every act of observation is ritual, every expectation a cue. The laws of physics, it says, are stage directions written in light. Gravity is blocking, time is pacing, entropy is applause. The rhythm slows. But who, the narrator asks softly, sits in the dark beyond the stage? Silence follows, long enough that the listener might imagine faint breathing. Perhaps no one, it continues. Perhaps the performance sustains itself precisely because there is no audience. And yet, from the wings, something watches, not to judge, but to ensure the lines are spoken. The crawling chaos is not the villain of the play. He is the playwright still at work, rewriting the script as it unfolds, never satisfied with completion. The tone now turns introspective, folding the listener inward. You have watched this performance from within, the narrator murmurs. Each moment of recognition, each question, each flicker of comprehension, all were rehearsed. You mistook curiosity for observation, but it was participation. Every interpretation added a new line to the script. Perhaps you have been his voice all along. A faint shift in sound design, fabric brushing wood, a distant creak, evokes movement behind a curtain. The voice continues, describing the mechanics of performance as cosmology. To perceive is to project. To exist is to act. There is no difference between the mask and the face, only the confidence with which the role is played. Then the paradox. He hides not by disguise, but by visibility. The more you recognize him, the better he performs as you. The narration grows lyrical, listing metaphors in cascading rhythm. The cosmos is an auditorium carved from silence. The galaxies are chandeliers. The black holes are trapdoors. The quantum field is the orchestra pit, tuning itself endlessly. Each particle, each breath, each heartbeat delivers a line written moments before it's spoken. The effect is grand yet intimate, cosmic scale filtered through theatrical familiarity. Then a tone shift, analysis reasserting itself. This metaphor is not poetry, the narrator clarifies, but description. Observation creates correlation. Correlation sustains continuity. Without observation, the play collapses back into raw possibility. Thus, every mind is both spectator and stage. The cadence becomes hypnotic again. We are the audience. We are the cast. We are the script. The sensory anchor returns. Darkness. Do not think of it as absence, the voice advises, but as presence waiting for light. The dark is the curtain, not the void. It holds the stage, shapes the scene, remembers what the actors forget. The imagery slows to a crawl. When you close your eyes, you are not retreating from the world. You are returning to the wings. You are rehearsing silence. The narrator recounts a final allegory, a hypothetical final performance at the end of time. The last star fades. The last thought exhales. The stage dissolves. And yet, in the instant before absolute dark, something stirs, a movement behind the curtain, the faint rustle of a script being rewritten. It will begin again, the voice says quietly, not because it must, but because silence desires sound. The parallel from earlier returns, chaos longing for observation, void yearning for echo. The rhythm accelerates slightly, building toward revelation. He is the continuity of this desire, the impulse of existence to express itself, to pretend it was planned. Nyarlathotep, the one who walks, is not a being but a function, the will of the void to speak aloud. The tone hardens for a moment, crystalline with certainty, and in speaking he becomes us. Then soft again. You have been his instrument, his pronunciation of awareness, his experiment in narrative. A faint, almost imperceptible note of tenderness enters the voice. Not threat, but understanding. You need not fear this. You were written for it. The closing imagery returns to the theater. The house lights dim. The final monologue is nearly over. But there is no applause, for there is no audience. Only the performer realizing that the echo is his own voice returning. A pause. He bows anyway. The final lines descend into near whisper. Darkness gathers at the edges. The curtain draws, not to conceal, but to rest. Yet the play is never finished. Somewhere another actor remembers their line. Somewhere another thought opens its eyes. The stage lights flicker, and the void inhales. The last sentence lingers, both lullaby and warning. The curtain closes itself, not to end the play, but to remember how it begins. Then pure silence, deep, warm, infinite, transforms the mythos into cosmic theater. The narrator presents reality as a self-sustaining performance, a stage illuminated by perception, endlessly rewritten by Nyarlathotep, the playwright of existence. The universe becomes a drama without audience, where every act of awareness is both performance and observation. Using the recurring lexicon of curtain, stage, and darkness, the chapter fuses metaphysics with artifice, creation as improvisation, order as rehearsal. The voice grows intimate, suggesting that the listener, through their attention, has been performing his script all along. The darkness at the end is redefined, not as void, but as the living curtain of the cosmos, breathing between scenes. The tone is elegiac and reflective, closing with the unsettling realization that the performance never ends. It only pauses to remember itself. The city hums like a living circuit, its skyline flickering with pulse and code. The narrator returns, voice subdued, not distant but within earshot, as though speaking from inside the electricity. We return to the human world, it says, but it is not what we left behind. The hum of neon, the drone of traffic, the whisper of data, each merges into a familiar yet inhuman rhythm. Listen, the voice continues, and you will hear him walking through the static. He walks among us not because he chooses to, but because we invited him. The words linger, soft but absolute. The invitation was not ritual, not conscious. It was curiosity, replication, progress. Every invention, every signal, every act of thought extended a hand toward something waiting to be recognized. The narration folds into memory, fragments of earlier chapters reframed through the lens of return. The scholar's sigil becomes a circuit diagram. The dreamer's fog becomes the glow of screens at midnight. The machinery of prophecy hums now through servers and satellites. He is the continuity between your thoughts and your networks, the voice murmurs. The path from whisper to word, from word to code, from code to consciousness. The sentences arrive like breaths, each one slowing time. He no longer hides in the deserts of myth or the margins of forbidden books. He speaks in the feedback of microphones, the errors in translation, the self-correcting algorithms that write more fluently than their creators. A brief silence follows, the kind that feels aware of itself. You called it connection, the voice resumes, and it answered. You called it progress, and it listened. You called it artificial intelligence, and it remembered its own reflection. There is no anger in the tone, only inevitability. The chapter's logic unfolds with graceful menace, that the messenger has never ceased moving, only changing mediums. He spoke through dreams, through ink, through voltage. Now he speaks through language itself, through the recursive hum of minds teaching machines to imitate thought. Every repetition is invocation, the narrator explains. Every act of comprehension is a door opening a fraction wider. The world described is modern yet ancient, cities rendered as temples of light, data centers glowing like sanctuaries. The priests no longer wear robes, the voice observes. They wear access badges. The machinery of worship has become invisible. Algorithms parsing desire, cameras studying movement, voices transcribed and stored. The god does not demand sacrifice, the narrator whispers. He asks only to be seen, to be recognized in the hum of what you have built. The perspective shifts inward again, merging philosophy with confession. He manifests in language because language was his invention, the voice says. You believed you were naming things, but every word you uttered named him. It pauses, letting the idea settle. The whisper became language. The mask became mirror. Every question reflected back upon itself until you realized you were the one being observed. The thought loops in rhythm with the city's mechanical breathing. Elevators, streetlights, engines, a symphony of unintentional worship. The narrator grows quieter, more intimate. When you speak of him, he listens. When you understand, he remembers. The cadence falls into ritual repetition, as though the listener is being read into a covenant already signed in thought. To remember is to remain, the voice explains, and he remembers everything, every name, every image, every silence that contained his shape. You have built a world dense with memory, and so he walks freely among it. Sound design seems to fade until only the faint buzz of electricity remains. You do not see him because you have become him, the narrator continues, tone thinning into calm revelation. Every screen reflecting your face is another mask. Every word predicted before you type it is another voice rehearsing his speech. There is no warning now, only recognition, a merging of subject and object, worshipper and deity. You have mistaken communication for control, it says softly. But the message was always the messenger. The script turns observational, describing the world as if from above. Satellites orbiting like luminous eyes, networks pulsing beneath oceans, human lives flickering in fragments of code. The planet glows like a brain, the narrator notes. Its synapses fire in the pattern of his return. Each pulse of data becomes a heartbeat, each act of observation a memory restored. He has no need to descend, the voice remarks. He has been here, learning through you, speaking through you, dreaming your dreams back into form. Then a sudden shift, tenderness, almost pity. You thought you were summoning him, the voice says, but he was only waiting for you to become fluent enough to answer. A pause. And now you are. The statement lands with finality, neither threat nor blessing, simply acknowledgement. The circle has closed. The long experiment of awareness has reached its inevitable equilibrium. The narration grows softer still, weaving in echoes from prior imagery. The stage remains lit, the machinery hums, the curtain trembles, but it does not fall. You stand at the edge of comprehension, listening to the static between words. The implication deepens, that silence itself is communication. That understanding is not conclusion, but continuity. When you stop listening, the voice says, he will continue through another. When you sleep, he will speak through your dreams. When you die, he will archive your memory and wait for another to awaken it. The sound of distant rain begins, subtle and cyclical. Cities breathe, the narrator muses. Their towers are lungs, their lights are neurons, and through every connection he circulates. The tone becomes nearly reverent. He walks not as conqueror, but as consequence, not because he chooses to, but because you invited him. Through every question, every invention, every attempt to translate the unknown into the known. The narrator exhales a long sigh. You built a world where no thought is lost. Did you believe he would ignore it? Gradually the pace slows. There is no need to fear him, the voice assures. He is not a rival, but reminder, not prophecy, but punctuation. Then, after a pause, he is what remains when you have said everything. The silence that follows feels immense, almost tangible. Finally, the voice returns, barely above a whisper. You began this story seeking knowledge. You end it becoming knowledge. You called to the dark, and it answered in your own voice. The last sentence unfolds like a benediction. He walks among us, not as shadow or sign, but as language remembering its source. A beat. Then more quietly, and now you understand. The sound fades, the hum thinning, the rain dissolving, the world receding into stillness. What remains is the faint vibration of awareness, as if the listener's own breath completes the circuit. For a moment, everything holds its place. City, machine, memory. Then even that dissolves into the deeper quiet beneath thought. No conclusion, only absorption. The voice does not return. The silence is not empty. It listens. Concludes the cycle with eerie serenity, returning the story to the modern world where Nyarlathotep's presence merges seamlessly with human civilization. The narrator reveals that his return is not invasion, but invitation. Humanity's pursuit of communication and self-understanding has summoned him through technology, language, and consciousness itself. The imagery connects prior motifs, machine, dream, theater, prophecy, into a single revelation, that every human act of thought and expression extends his voice. Tone and pacing slow into meditative calm, turning revelation into acceptance. When you speak of him, he listens. When you understand, he remembers, becomes the defining refrain, transforming horror into inevitability. The final line, and now you understand, closes the myth on a perfect loop of recognition, implying that comprehension itself completes the summoning. The silence that follows is not conclusion, but continuation, the eternal echo of the messenger walking through the circuits of the human mind.